Welcome back to the second and final installment of the Marvel Universe if Marvel always had the rights. We will be going from 2014 to present day. I could possibly keep doing installments if people would really want to see them, but probably not. I have way more What If Universe videos in the future, so stay tuned for those. With that though, let's further theorize on what this version of the MCU could look like. Maybe. First things first is SheHulk. Now, unfortunately to most non-comic book fans, SheHulk is a shitty, annoying, horrendously awful character thanks to the MCU completely and utterly butt-fucking her character up the asshole. However, to people who actually know of her character, she was one of Marvel's most beloved niche characters and was a huge fan favorite. With that, I would want to keep that for this film. Duh. Now, it would include a proper origin to the character and her actually being a competent enough lawyer that the mob would actually want to put a hit out on her. The movie would be an action comedy, but it would include her actually getting an arc where by the end of the film, she would stay as herself in SheHulk form and essentially getting rid of her secret identity. Then, the main villain would be Titania, as she is SheHulk's greatest rival because she is a great foil to Jessica Walters. Walters has a reasonably good life and felt comfortable in her own skin. Then she became a Hulk, and all of a sudden she had to deal with her body changing like this. Then Titania was the opposite. She didn't feel comfortable in her own skin, was timid, was short, and really skinny. She was bestowed these powers by Dr. Doom thinking it would make her life better. So, both of these characters deal with being given these enhancements to their bodies and how both react so differently, adding to that development for both, as well as punching for a bit. That also helps. Bruce Banner would obviously make a cameo. If I would imagine anyone to direct, I think Patty Jenkins could work, as she almost did write and direct Thor the Dark World, but due to creative differences, she left the project. So she almost did do something Marvel related, so it's not totally out of nowhere. Then if I were to get anyone for Jessica, even if it would be a smaller role, I think Natalie Portman could do a good job, again going back to the Thor comparison. I'm not sure how I would do the She-Hulk form, since this would be a movie and have an actual budget. The She-Hulk form could work as CGI. If not, get someone like Brooke Ence and just make her green. I would be fine with either. Next up is Namor. This was in consideration for a film way back when in the mid-2000s, but was cancelled. So let's resurrect it here, as I've done with so many cancelled films. I think you could make this similar to Aquaman, with a guy being of two worlds and needs to join them together. Sort of an underwater epic sort of thing. I don't know a ton about the character, but since that's what was planned for the movie, then I would say do something along those lines. I would get David Slade to direct, because I do think he can have a good enough vision, but is small enough to make it a personal story within this big underwater epic. If I were to get anyone to play Namor, I think Pablo Schreiber could be a good fit. There could even be a Defenders tease somewhere in the movie, maybe. Next is Daredevil II. Following with Joe Carnahan's trilogy, unfortunately the only thing that is really known about it is that the movie would have been inspired by punk rock. Outside of that, there's nothing. So with Kingpin being in the previous film, I think Bullseye, another famous Daredevil villain, should be here. I feel like that would make sense. Maybe you could even introduce Elektra here. But that's kinda it, so moving on, I guess. Next is Nova. So this movie would essentially be an epic space adventure, kind of like how Namor was an epic underwater adventure, but they would be different tones. Namor would be a bit more serious, while this would be a bit more fun. Richard Rider would obviously be the protagonist, and I think someone like Chris Pine would be good for the role. The villain could be Dr. Sun or Garth and Saul, or honestly, anybody. Maybe not even have a main villain. Have it be sort of an anthology film with Nova going across the galaxy with different similar situations to take care of, similar to my Adam Strange idea for the DCEU project. I think Jon Favreau could be a good option to direct. Next is Deadpool. While this movie would probably have no reason to exist since, only 2 X-Men films have been made at this point rather than a huge franchise, I needed a spot to fill in 2016, so I decided to include this. So this would essentially be the movie we got, with Tim Miller directing and Ryan Reynolds starring. Colossus would have more of a point here since this version had actually been seen beforehand rather than being a recast. But that's about it, so moving on again. Next is the Avengers Masters of Evil. So this won't be inserting Age of Ultron into the timeline, at least not yet, because I feel there needed to be more build up to properly introducing the Ultron the Avengers have to fight. I did say that Ultron does exist, as I mentioned it during the Ant-Man movie summary. It wouldn't be what we actually know of Ultron, at least not yet. So this movie would be about the Avengers fighting the Masters of Evil. It's kinda sorta taking Nando V Movie's idea for the sequel, except no Ultron, and instead actually use Baron Zemo. Because in this movie, this is when Captain America joins the team. And when he did so, in the comics, Baron Zemo went after him and the Avengers. So that would essentially be this movie. It would be the original incarnation of the team, except without Scourge, because I feel that would have been a bit too many members. Outside of that, it would essentially be the same team. Joss Whedon would come to direct this film, or Brad Bird, depending on your preference. Next is SpiderMan IV. This would be similar to the movie we almost got, with Vulture as the main villain and Black Cat as a side villain. I know she would have been Vulturous in the movie, but I felt that that was pretty fucking stupid, so I'm not using that. Whatever plot details we have, which is extremely little, those would be included in this film, and Sam Raimi would return. Next is The Punisher. Now this one is a bit of a tough one, because there's many different interpretations and versions you could do. I would probably stick with the Netflix version with some notes from the films. It would be as hyper-violent as all three, and probably bring in Jon Bernthal, since he did such a good job, and since this would come out in 2017, and that's when the actual show came out, I feel like having him would make sense. However, I do think Thomas Jane could work as well, because he aged pretty well and he could make it work. It wouldn't be an origin film, because I would want to focus on Frank Castle as a character rather than simply guy who bad stuff happens to. I would probably make the villain Jigsaw, as that would make the most sense since he is the archenemy of Punisher and a good foil for Frank. I think someone like Robert Rodriguez could do a good job with something like this, as he has done so with comic book adaptations in the past, mainly Sin City. In fact, it would be cool to see this in black and white. Not stylized like Sin City, but I think making it black and white could be a good choice for the overall tone it's going for. I wouldn't want it to be over the top, but more visceral and gritty with some campy aspects here and there. Next is Fantastic Four Annihilation. For the third Fantastic Four film, as you could probably guess from the title, the main villain would be Annihilus. I would probably take notes from Annihilus's first appearance, to tease Franklin Richards as well. However, despite the title, it would mainly be an original story with Fantastic Four fighting Annihilus, although there would be some notes to compare to the comics, like Annihilus sensing great power in Franklin Richards, although in this case not being born yet. And that is the reason he fights the Fantastic Four. This would eventually result in Annihilus getting defeated by the Fantastic Four with some help from some of their allies, SheHulk and Spider-Man. However, Human Torch is eventually killed, and SheHulk joins the team at the end of the film, with fast-forwarding a couple months to see Franklin being born as well. It would still be directed by Peyton Reed. Next is XMen Sinister. Once again, we are deterring with third films, and this one would not be an adaptation of The Last Stand, but something different entirely. Not even the original plan that Bryan Singer wanted to do, mainly because we haven't seen who I want the main villain to be in a movie yet, so I decided to put him here, and with that, obviously the main villain would be Mr. Sinister, as well as a couple more X-Men being added to the team, like some fan favorites like Rogue, Gambit, and Kitty Pryde. In terms of casting these characters, you could get any actor that would be in their early to mid-20s at this point, or at least looks it. I don't have anyone in mind since we're getting into territory I'm a bit more unfamiliar with, but Matthew Vaughn would direct, but you could also get someone who does ensembles well. Brad Bird is another choice similar to Avengers. Next, we have The Incredible Hulk 3. So for the final Incredible Hulk movie for the time being, here we have the continuation of what was set up in the previous film, mainly with Samuel Stearns becoming the leader, who would be the main villain, as well as any other ideas that were supposed to be in the Incredible Hulk sequel we never got, like furthering some aspects in terms of Hulk versus Banner and what that would mean for that dichotomy. It would then be directed by Louis Leterrier, or Edward Norton could even direct it, since in 2019 he directed his first feature, and we could replace Motherless Brooklyn with this. Then next is Daredevil 3. Again, very little is known about this movie, just that the musical movement that would have inspired the film would have been new wave. Not really sure who the villain could be. Could be any of the C-list villains like the Owl, Gladiator, or fucking Stiltman for all I know. Maybe even have him go toe-to-toe with Punisher, who knows. It would still be directed by Joe Carnahan. Next is Heroes for Hire. Luke Cage and Iron Fist finally come together for this buddy action comedy. It would have the supporting characters you would think it to have. It would involve Cage and Rand doing a couple of separate jobs around New York, helping people with various things, big or small. It would then be revealed that all the things that happened in the film were being manipulated by a higher power. It could be someone big like the Purple Man, Black Mariah, Hammerhead, or Tombstone. Someone that can have a lot of power and can manipulate events properly. I think it could be absolutely perfect to have Shane Black direct this, since he is probably the best when it comes to buddy action films. Next is Wolverine. Now this could be a number of things. It could be a better version of X-Men Origins, it could be the Wolverine, or it could adapt any famous Wolverine stories, whatever you imagine. I would probably want to stick with the Wolverine because that movie is so good outside of the third act. With that, I would probably clean up the third act a little bit, make it a little bit less of a CGI fuckfest kind of thing. But outside of that, I would stick with the Wolverine, but obviously things would have to change because it does have some notes of Jean Grey's death and all that, and that didn't happen here. So who knows? You could probably still make it work. So with that, James Mangold would also direct. Next up is Midnight Suns, bringing in some more of the horror aspects into this MCU. Ghost Rider is already set up, so he would be the main leader of this group. In terms of other members, Blade and Morbius would show up, as well as any other intriguing horror characters that have been a part of the lineup, like Man-Thing, Moon Knight, Werewolf by Night, or Hellstrom. Now, considering that Blade was made in 1998, before this version of the MCU started, it's possible that that movie was made. However, I couldn't find anything in regards to Marvel rights being sold before or after the production of the movie, so who knows. Let's say the first movie managed to get made, but not the sequels. So in this case, Wesley Snipes would come back as Blade. I do think that Jared Leto could have been a good Morbius because he most definitely has the look and the acting ability down. However, he's a fucking creep, so probably best in mind to get somebody else. Dan Stevens could be good, or even Matt Smith, since he was the best part of the movie. In terms of the other members, Man-Thing would be practicals and CGI. Moon Knight could be played by Oscar Isaac, or even other similar actors like Robert Pattinson or Bill Skarsgård. Werewolf by Night would again be mainly CGI and practicals, and then Hellstrom could be played by Tom Austin or anybody similar. I think James Wan could be a good fit for director, with Lilith, Mother of Demons, being the main villain. Next up is Black Panther. Pretty much the movie we got, but actually good. Obviously, Jordan as Killmonger would stay because he was pretty much one of the few great parts of the movie. Claw wouldn't die after like one appearance, especially with the next film. The CGI wouldn't look like complete shit, and it would actually be paced properly. Move the South Korean scenes to the beginning of the film and pretty much go from there. Establish that maybe Claw could be the main villain, but in reality, it's actually Killmonger. Cut out all the dumbass, non-important scenes in the movie, and you should be good. Ryan Coogler could stay, but I would be curious with what Ava DuVernay had in mind for the film, so she could be used as well. Next, we have The Avengers Ultron Unlimited. Now, this would essentially be the movie we got, but fit into more of Joss Whedon's vision since it got hacked to pieces. A little bit less comedy and make Ultron not have lips because that was a weird decision. Obviously, it would have to fit in with this continuity, but I think it could still work. Next is Inhumans. Yeah, I know, but stay with me. I think this could have been a really good Shakespearean drama akin to what the first Thor movie was, but even more so. With that, I think Kenneth Branagh would be great to direct this one, or even Peter Jackson could work too. Obviously, the entire Inhuman royal family would be at the center of the film. Black Bolt, Medusa, Karnak, Gorgon, Triton, Crystal, Lockjaw, and Maximus, and might as well stick with the latter being the main villain like in the TV series. But it would actually be good this go around, and a film, as well as Black Bolt looking more like he did in Multiverse of Madness rather than the actual series, as well as the rest of the royal family. It's just that the costumes in the show were so boring and bland, while their comic book counterparts were actually, interesting and really cool looking, and it would be really awesome to see those on the big screen. Then finally, for now at least, is X-Men Age of Apocalypse Part 1. This would be the first part of adapting the saga that is Age of Apocalypse. Obviously, things would have to be tweaked for time, as well as characters that haven't been properly set up not being in the film. You could even include other non-X-Men characters in the film to show the gravity of the change of the universe. Matthew Vaughn would still direct the film. Obviously, in the year 2024, you would get the second part, but since it's not present day, I can't really showcase the future because who knows what will happen. And for Legion, again, might as well stick with Dan Stevens, have Matt Smith be Morbius, because Dan Stevens as Legion was absolutely fucking awesome. So put him here, fuck it. So that is it for the Marvel Universe if Marvel always had the rights. It's not exactly concrete, but considering this would be a world where it started in the early 2000s where nobody really cared, I would imagine it would kind of stay that way for the universe. It's looser, doesn't have phases, and the films would actually feel distinct from one another, with Marvel actually trying to do new and interesting things rather than the same movies over and over and over again. But that's it for now. I will see you in the next video.